Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Sariah Wilson.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. How are you doing?
I am doing great too. I'm so excited to have you back on. This is going to be a lot of fun. And anyone listening to this, if you've not already, go and check out the previous episode I recorded, Sariah, where we talk all about her book, Seat Filler. So can you tell me about your book?
This is always the worst part because the reason I write novels is because it takes me 85,000 words to explain something. But basically it's about a girl who is a professional bridesmaid who has to keep it secret. She's under an NDA and she has a rule about not dating wedding guests. And the best man is awfully cute and awfully suspicious as his company's about to go public. And so he thinks she's, nefarious and up to no good. So he's keeping an eye on her and she's trying to keep him at arm's length and hijinks ensue.
Yes. And this book is a lot of fun. I was having a blast while reading it. So how did you get the idea? It's such a unique profession, like being a paid bridesmaid. How did you get the idea to write about that? And
literally
hear about it?
Literally saw an article, scrolling through Google recommending headlines. And she's like, I am a professional bridesmaid. And I'm like, well, isn't that interesting? And, an idea starts sprouting from there. And I remember I sent it to my agent and she's like, you're not the first person to write this, right? Like I have another client who's got a whole series of paid bridesmaid stories. And I said, no, I didn't know. But, I think I have this take on it, which I think they'll be fun. And there's nothing new under the sun, right? There's just, you come up with something that hasn't been done a million times before. But yeah, so that's how I came up with it and just kind of ran with it from there.
That's so cool. Yeah. And I totally agree with you on that. It's like at this point in the world and creativity, nothing is, no idea is completely your own, but it's just what you do with it that makes it yours.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what sort of work did you do to establish the setting for this book? Because it's really fun because it's set in Hawaii and you get to kind of get taken through the hotel and the island that they're on. So how'd you work with that?
I had actually gone on a family vacation to Hawaii for the first time, I want to say a year or 2 years before I wrote this book. The pandemic has really screwed me up time-wise. I don't remember when stuff actually happened because I've been inside for so long. But so it was a blast. And I love Hawaii. It's such a beautiful, beautiful place. And so I thought it'd be fun to make it be a destination wedding where you don't have a choice but to be part of the experience. That if she was, I don't know. I thought let's make it a destination wedding and make it so that it's someplace beautiful, someplace the readers would like to be maybe, and let you kind of imagine that you're there and just kind of a fun escape. But I think just having been there myself, I did look stuff up. I did look up hotels. I did that a lot. Okay, I'm going to set it in this hotel. What should it have? And what kind of ballroom should it have? And I looked stuff up and just kind of take pieces and parts from different locations and things like that. And, we had a reader to go over and make sure that we were treating the Hawaiian culture respectfully, because that was important to me too. For example, I'll give you an example. When you have a flower lei, for me, plural of lei is leis, right? You have one lei, two leis. That is incorrect. Apparently, lei is not pluralized in the Hawaiian language. So we left it singular, even when it was multiple. So that was, I'm like, that doesn't feel right in my grammar brain, but we left it that way. So it was just a lot of fun kind of exploring different places and things and having my own trip there. But yeah, it's a beautiful place and it was a lot of fun setting it there.
That's really cool. I love that you had someone reading for that too. I always on this show, I always make sure to advocate for that because it's so important that writers are having sensitivity readers and making sure that they're being respectful about the places and the people that they're writing about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important. And I will be the first one to say, sometimes you don't know what you don't know until somebody else points it out. And, kind of being raised the way that I was raised, and you try your best to learn and do what's right and what is best for everyone out there. And the last thing I would ever want to do is offend anyone. The the whole reason I write is just to have it be this escapist fantasy where you're just brought out of your everyday life and get to just really lift your burdens for a little bit. So I would never want to write something that would hurt someone else. And I, with the sensitivity read with this book too, they kind of made me back off the alcoholism a little bit. And that is something that's very personal for me. Both my grandfathers were alcoholics who died because of their alcoholism. They were both abusive. They were both just really bad parents. And my parents, individually had both decided to break the cycle and stop it. And so for me growing up, alcoholism was something I lived with and saw how destructive it was. So I don't have a positive outlook on it. Mm-hmm. And I have some very, personal feelings about it. And they're like, you kind of need to ease up a little bit on this. You kind of need to not be, and I'm like, that's true. I wouldn't want to hurt someone who's experiencing it or going through it. And, kind of have to find that balance of what do you want to say as a writer, as opposed to, I don't want to hurt people in my audience.
And making sure that you're still being truthful to your experiences too.
Right. Absolutely. So yeah, it can be a difficult line to walk sometimes. But yeah, so I am glad for sensitivity readers. I find them very helpful and I'm very grateful for them.
Yeah, that is really awesome. So you mentioned that you were doing a lot of research around like the hotel and the locations and stuff like that. Do you have any recommendations for resources for writers, like trying to figure out how to like make their setting more based in reality?
We are so fortunate to live in this time period where you can write Hawaiian destination wedding and there are, a million websites that pop up. And that's essentially what I did. And looking at what kind of things would you offer? I looked up weddings. I just think the internet is such a treasure trove of information that you can find out anything. And stuff like Google Maps, you can actually go to an area and zoom in on it and see exactly what it looks like, even if you've never been there. Like that's phenomenal. For me, I don't really have places I go to. It's just more of a, what am I looking for in this scene? Like when I was kind of thinking about the book, because I've never been to a week-long wedding. I've heard of them, I've had friends who've had them, but I've never been to one where like it was just week-long activities. So I had to look it up. What kind of stuff would you do? And taking it and altering it to fit my characters and fit my story. But yeah, I just think it helps to kind of be what specifically are you looking for? Because if you just look up Hawaii, like that's not going to help you in, finding out what you need to find out. So maybe you're looking up Hawaiian beaches because you want to describe a beach and you're looking at what does it look like and how do you describe it? And, but I think kind of zeroing in on what specifically you want as far as information goes, because I think sometimes I'm guilty of that too, just inputting a very general, broad search term and not getting a lot of return from it.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Were there any books or movies that influenced your writing process for this, or even just like in the very beginning with like coming up with ideas for it?
Not with this one. Sometimes that does happen where I'll watch a movie or watch a show or something and like something sparks your imagination. And there's things you want to include or, you think, oh, I take the story this way and do this. This one was just reading that article and then building it as a process becomes, okay, so this is the setup. What keeps the hero and heroine apart? Because I do write sweet romances. I feel like that kind of adds a degree of difficulty in portraying the story because you have to keep them apart for a lot longer than you would in a typical steamier romance. So you have to figure out what are those initial conflicts and what's the overall conflict, and so I kind of grow it out from there. And then thinking of little things here and there to fill it in and characters are going to help with the story and driving the characters forward. But yeah, I feel like coming up with those conflicts and the personalities of the characters for me is what's most important in the beginning. And then taking it out further and further from that point.
I kind of want to zero in on what you were just saying about coming up with the personalities of the characters, because in this book, I personally felt like there were a lot of like really fun, bold character choices. Yeah. And that makes it so much more entertaining to read. Can you tell me a bit about your process with that?
I wish I could I had something where I'd be like, oh, this is how you do this. No, I'm terrible at that. I would just say that for me, it's how do the hero and heroine or your protagonist, how do they complement each other? How how do you as a reader, because have you ever read like a romance where you're like, this couple would never last? Like you get to the end and even though they're together, you're like, you would never work out in real life. You would never be happy. Like, I don't care if you're together right now. Because the characters are just so incompatible as a reader. So I think as an author, I try to be careful to create characters that you really think, yeah, this couple could very much be in love, and they could, they maybe have different personalities. They click on things that matter and that are important. And so you find those little ways to kind of bond them together and make these connections that makes it believable to a reader. And as far as personality goes, I just think it's pulling a lot from people around you, from the art that you're consuming, through different mediums. What makes a character interesting? What's going to catch the reader's eye? And there's some times where I'm like, I feel like I've put minimal effort into a character and someone's like, oh, they're my favorite character. I hope they're getting their own book soon. And I'm like, well, okay, then I'm glad you like them so much, But yeah, it's serving the story first and foremost. And because people are so different in real life, I think it's important to kind of put that in your stories too.
Cool. Yeah. I totally get what you mean about like how certain people like just love that. Cause I'm somebody that has always been a fan of like side characters and stuff.
Yeah.
Whenever it's like someone, it's like, this person has only like 3 lines in the book. And then they automatically become like my favorite character.
Well, and I've seen it in books where like that's happened to me, where there's a character who like just has, like you said, 3 lines of dialogue, but they're all so hilarious and funny that you're like, I want this character to have their own book. And then they get their own book and no author can sustain that for 300 pages, right? And so it becomes more like, I remember reading one where I was so disappointed, and that's not fair because like I said, nobody can sustain every word coming out of your mouth being hilarious all the time. And so I remember feeling kind of disappointed in it, but yeah, that can happen. You can get disappointed and be let down by what you were hoping for sometimes, I think.
Yeah. And at least in my opinion, a lot of times too, side characters are kind of in books to provide something that can be a little bit bolder than the main character. I'm going to say this wrong, but a lot of times I find that it's better to have main characters that are a little less interesting than some of the others. Cause that way you can still get into their story and kind of, like relate to them more,
Right. If you were a character that hated something that you loved personally, just in every page was just about how they hated this thing, like that makes it hard for, I think sometimes for readers to connect because they feel so different. And people are like, you don't describe your heroines very well. And I'm like, that's on purpose because I want a reader to be able to put herself in that scenario if she chooses. And if I say she has flaming red hair and green eyes, and you're like, well, I have blonde hair and brown eyes and I can't relate to what it's like to be a redhead, it can kind of pull people out of the story sometimes. So I don't remember where I learned that, but I think that's a useful piece of advice, especially when you write first person like I do, that, you are inviting a reader to come be in this character's shoes. It's like you said, I think if you give them such distinct likes and dislikes, it makes them realistic. But if it's such a big deal, like if I wrote a character who hated animals, just hates animals, hates pets, oh my gosh, like, everybody in the audience would be like, I'm never reading you again. So, but there are people out there who do hate animals, right? Like, but it's not something I ever want to include because I love my animals, but I've just for an example. So I think you have to be careful with that. I think you're right.
Yeah. And especially in romance too, a lot of times it can be more fun to have a character and read a character or even write a character that is more of a self-insert for the audience. Because then you can kind of play around with it more as you're reading,
Yeah, absolutely.
So kind of switching what we were talking about, do you have any tips on like combating writer's block and getting back into a book? Because now at this point you've written several books and I can only imagine that it would be kind of difficult to try and like after you finish one, try and get back into writing with the next idea. So I'm very much in awe of these writers who write like a book every couple of months, just continually all year, write 6 to 10 books a year. And I found this interesting as I've gone on. Like I've wondered, why do romance authors quit? Like, why do you have someone like, for me, Jennifer Cruzy, I think is such a brilliant writer, so funny. And she's so funny in person too. And she stopped writing,
and I'm like, why did you stop writing? And now that I'm on this end of it, I kind of get it more, because you start feeling like, I've done fake dating, I've done marriage of convenience, I've done this trope, and you start, and even if you try to make it totally different, like I have two movie actor romances, two celebrity romances. And I was actually really careful in writing the second one to not have it be a retread of the first one. I thought I didn't want the issues to be the same. I didn't want, people are like, well, this could be the reason they don't date. I'm like, well, no, that can't be, because that was Zoe's issue in Starstruck. So I can't have this character have the same problem. But how much you try not to repeat yourself. And I worry about jokes getting recycled. It's my sense of humor. It's jokes I say. And so I'm sure that I have like the same jokes in books. And people are like, didn't you say this in this book? And it doesn't help when your readers read your books like 6 times and, know it inside and out better than you do.
But it's like you want to have fans, but also then they're watching.
Forget about the other stuff. Keep going. But I think for me with writer's block is, and I know people don't like to hear this, and I was just listening to Brandon Sanderson, who writes fantasy. I was listening to a lecture series that he's doing. Mm-hmm. He said writer's block is not real for him because the book has to be written. And that's how I feel. Writer's block is not real for me. I am not stopped from writing by my brain. It's just, I just write, and even if it's bad, even if it's like the worst thing you've ever written, just write it and just keep going. And your story might come out of that. Like, I don't really like to do a lot of editing. Like people who do like 6 or 7 revisions on their novel, I don't do that. What I send into my publisher is pretty much how it came out. And that's pretty much how it gets published. We don't really usually have a lot of massive editing. Mm-hmm. But I have writer's block because there's a deadline and stuff has to be turned in, people are waiting on it and I want to be professional. So I don't dispute that it's real for other people and that they have that issue. I don't know how you get through it other than just to write, even if it's getting up in the morning and handwriting, break up your writing pattern, handwrite 5 pages if you normally type them. Don't have it be about the book, have it be about something else. There's someone who said they do that like a toxic dump. Like they just get up and all this stuff in their head that's telling them they're an imposter and it's not very good and you're a terrible writer and nobody's going to read this. Write all that down, get it out of your head, and then move on. And there's got to be a way to work on your story. But even if you feel like you can't write past this point, and I would believe this too, that if you are stuck in your book, you have made a mistake and your subconscious is telling you you've done something wrong. That the way you're going, the storyline, the characterization, whatever it is. And the thing about, I think, being on this end of the writing it and having had experience is you start learning, oh, yeah, you can find it better than I think, a novice writer could, because they're not accustomed to finding what their mistakes are. But I do believe that if you are really stuck like that, I feel like it's your brain telling you you're taking a wrong direction. And there's so many people who do that write a book to a certain point and then abandon it because it's writer's block. I don't know how to go on. I would say find out what the problem is and then write past it. Because I think you've got to train yourself to finish the book, even if you think it's terrible, even if it's going under your bed, never to see the light of day. Just go ahead and finish it and move on and take what you learned onto the next one.
Yeah. Thank you. That's some really great advice. I hope anyone listening to this is really taking that in. And I know for me personally too, like when I'm writing, just the other day, I was like, oh no, I don't have any ideas. I can't write anything. And I sat down and I just like set a timer for myself. And within 10 minutes, I had a fully fleshed out idea and I could not like get it down fast enough.
Same.
And
then you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. That had been after days of going, oh, I have no ideas. So sometimes you just have to get in front of the computer or the typewriter or the page, whatever that is. And
doing it, just doing it. That is the best advice. Just sit down and write.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So in the Paid Bridesmaid, I caught a seat filler reference when you were saying like that they were going to watch a Noah Douglas movie. Were there any other things like that hidden in the book? And like, do you write with the intention of it like all being in the same world?
Yeah, it is all in the same world for me. And in that Noah Douglas reference, there's also Chase Covington, who has his own book in Starstruck. So I do that because I want to write in a way that it doesn't pull a new reader out of the story. Because, I mean, maybe they go, oh, who's that? But then they forget about it. It's not this big deal. But for someone who's read the other books, they're like, oh my gosh, that's an Easter egg. Yay. And it makes you feel so smart and included, And I love putting in Easter eggs for the fans and stuff that they really enjoy. So I do try to do that sometimes. I don't want to get like overkill on it, because then it starts detracting from the story. But yeah, I try to sometimes in ways that I can. But for me, yeah, it's very much all set in the same universe. And I have characters referencing things like, in Star Trek, they reference a reality show that I wrote about in a different book series. Like I haven't liked this show since this hero was on, and just fun little things like that. But I think in the Paid Bridesmaid, I think that's kind of the only reference to kind of my in-world stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun as someone like that had read the other book to catch that.
Yeah.
And I've always been a fan of the Easter eggs. So
me too. I love Easter eggs.
Were there any characters or plot lines that you had to cut out of the book, like kind of like a kill your darlings type thing? And if so, would you mind sharing them?
I don't like telling other writers this because it makes them mad. But no, I don't ever have deleted scenes. I don't ever have stuff that I wanted to put in and couldn't. I don't ever have, stuff that was too much. Like I don't write 150,000 words and whittle it down to 90 like that. I just don't do that. It's not my writing process. And if it is yours, people listening, if that's your writing process, fantastic. Find out what works for you. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so important to listen to professional authors and go to conferences and things. Because I think what you're trying to do is find your process, because a lot of times you don't know what your process is until somebody else says something and you're like, oh, yes. And it sparks something for you. Like I was trying to outline this fantasy novel. So I contacted a couple of friends of mine who, are writing YA fantasy. I said, how do you outline it? And she's like, well, I get this whiteboard and there's all these Post-its. And I'm like, I'm out. Like, there's no way, that doesn't appeal to me. But to someone else, that's going to be their saving grace, right? That's going to be exactly how they plot books. And I think that's fantastic in finding what works for you. But for me, I don't know. The stuff I write is what goes in the book. I don't think I've ever had a scene cut by an editor in all my years of doing this. I sometimes plan too many scenes. Like I don't outline. So it really is, I really am a pantser, just going as I go. And then when I kind of see my word count, okay, we're getting to 60,000 words. I got to start pulling it in. Like maybe I had thought of, I could have this scene of this happening, but now it's unnecessary because, but so I never fleshed it out. I never wrote it down. It was just sort of in my head that I could do it to help move the story along, but it ended up not being necessary. But yeah, I don't write stuff down and then cut it. And my publicist is like, you could do that in a newsletter. You could send out your cut scenes. I'm like, I don't have any cut scenes.
Wow.
They're all in the books. So yeah.
That's really interesting. I think you might be the first person on the show to say that you haven't had any of that. No, it just goes to show
everybody's different. Yeah, everyone's so different. And I've had to add a couple of scenes into books where, like my editor said, I don't feel like the heroine's to blame. She doesn't have enough of a comeuppance. You need to have her do something. So I definitely have added scenes to kind of, fill out the black moment a little bit more or make something more clear. But no, I don't. I've never cut stuff.
That's really, really fascinating. And it's just saying like what you were just saying about how everyone needs to just listen to different writers and see like how many different methods there are.
Right. Because the problem too, when you go to these conferences, and I get mad when it happens, but they're like, this is the only way to write a book. My way that I'm telling you right now is the only way to write a book. And I'm like, that's not true. And I write really fast. When I start writing, I write my books in about a month, a little bit less than a month. And they're 90,000 word books, and I had an author tell me no book of quality is written in less than a month. That's not true. Yeah. I've won best romances of the year at Amazon 2 years in a row. It's they're obviously okay books, but I thought if I had listened to that person, it would have killed my career. I would have thought, oh, I'm not actually writing good books and nobody's going to like these because this professional author said this doesn't happen. So yeah, you definitely have to. And whenever I teach a class, I always try to make it, this is my method. This is how I do things. Yours could be the total opposite. And that is perfectly fine. Like just do whatever works for you because we're all different and we all just approach things so radically differently. They just, like you said, find what works for you and ignore everybody else who's trying to sell you their method.
Absolutely. And like, it just takes trial and error too. Like I've found for me, like I don't have a great memory when it comes to my ideas. So I just have to write down really chaotic documents with every single thing that comes into my head. Until I can sit down and flesh out like whatever story it is. But I know a lot of people who are pantsers or who have like hyper organized post-it note walls, like what you were saying. Like there's so many different methods and so many different styles of writing that it's like there's never just one thing.
Yes.
So I just have a couple more questions for you today. The first one is, what's your favorite thing about writing romance?
My favorite thing about writing romance is that it is stories for women by women. You know, obviously that's not 100% the case, and there's all different kinds of people that I'm not including in that statement. But historically, that these are stories that women want to hear that are written from a woman's perspective by women. And I think that is really, really important, especially in this marketplace where it is dismissed and belittled and looked down upon. And, you know, by these other genre and literary writers. And I'm like, and who do you think keeps your publisher's lights on? You know, it's the romance writers who are selling all the books. And because I think there has to be a place where we get to have our stories, where we get to have things that are important to us, because, you know, Hollywood is telling us all your stuff is stupid. All your stuff is unimportant. What's important is this guy over here, after his wife gets killed, killing all the bad guys. That's the important story. You know, him being the hero, that's what matters. And I think, and I found it for myself that in becoming a romance reader that, you know, I had grown up in my household. My dad loved fantasy. My mom loved romance. And she was Harlequin, you know, book packages every month. And we were really poor, but we always had books in our house. And so I was in school and taking like AP English. So I was reading a lot of classics, you know, and I got very snobby about how classics are so much better than romance's mom, you know, as teenagers do. And then I realized as I was reading like these fantasy novels and stuff that I was looking for the romance in the stories and often being disappointed. And, you know, honestly, because they were being written by men, where it's like two characters look at each other and like, you're hot, I love you. Okay. You know, and that's the romance. And I'm like, wait, no, where's all the buildup? Where's all these emotional moments? And where's all these,
just focused on like the woman's body or something.
Right. And I'm like, where's all these important things that happen in a romance, you know? And I found myself looking for that and turning more towards romance because I thought, this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for these relationships where people fall in love and how it changes them. And because so many of us will fall in love. That is something we're going to experience. You know, you're not going to climb Mount Doom and throw a ring in, you know, like that's not going to happen to you. But I feel like romance is something that we can relate to and aspire to and hope for in our lives if we haven't had it yet. I don't know. I just think they're incredibly important stories that are so looked down on, and that infuriates me. But I want to have these stories preserved and have them be out there and have them be recognized for what they are. And then, like I said, it's stories that we're telling each other about stuff that's important to us.
Absolutely. And like romance is not a genre that I usually read, but like I always have fun with your books. And whenever I've read it, like I understand it's so important. And it's like, I totally get what you mean about how it gets looked down upon, because I see it constantly, or people will be like making snarky comments about people that enjoy it or like the books in this genre. And it's like, no, this is something that can actually be really important and can be very personal for people.
Absolutely. And teaching us that you should be looking for a relationship where you're treated well. You should be looking for a relationship where the other person respects you and loves you and puts your needs first as you put their needs first. And, you know, people are like, romance novels are so unrealistic. I'm like, it's not unrealistic to teach people that they should be looking for a good relationship and that they should be wanting that and not settling for something less than just so they're not alone. So yeah, I think it is very personal and it can speak to us and help us through life sometimes. And I know that sounds probably kind of outlandish, but I've met a lot of people where they're like, romance novels changed my life or helped me because I was in this horrible relationship and didn't know it until I read about how nice and respectful this hero was. And I was like, wait, I need that too. So yeah, I think it's important.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely believe that like a good book in any genre can completely transform someone's life.
Yeah.
And yeah, romance is just another important one. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It was so great to talk with you again.
Yes, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I just have one last question, and that is, what do you have coming up?
Well, after this one, I've got one coming out. It's called Cinder Nanny, and it is about a woman who answers an ad for a nanny position in Aspen that's like impossible, like fluent in French, master's degree in bioengineering, just this ridiculous thing to be a nanny to a 5-year-old child. And she takes the job to pay her sister's medical bills. And then she ends up meeting a man who is hiding from the British press. He's a nobleman. And they connect and start to date. And she is keeping this big lie from everybody because she's not who she says she is. So it was a lot of fun to write.
Cool. That sounds awesome. Well, if you want to come back on when that comes out.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'll be here.
You're welcome anytime. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
And I'm Sariah Wilson.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.